Hello everyone and welcome to this exchange. The title of this exchange is Eat Your Campus, a project to develop Loughborough University as an edible landscape. It will last approximately 30 to 45 minutes for content, and it will allow time for questions towards the end or during. If you would like to ask any questions during the webinar, just pop them in the chat box as you can see it there. Your speakers for this exchange are Jo Shields, and she's the Sustainability Manager at Loughborough University, and Anne-Marie Colhane, who is a Sustainability Campaigner and Artist. My name is Emma, and I'm the Member Events and Communities Officer here at the EAUC. As you know, the EAUC delivered a Sustainability Exchange, which is initially funded by HESCI and led by Staffordshire University. So what are exchanges? Exchanges are free lunchtime webinars on a range of sustainability topics. Anyone can present them. Just get in touch with us at sustainabilityexchange@eauc.org.uk or myself. Just a little bit of housekeeping to go over now. I'm hoping that everyone can hear okay. I have muted you all just to avoid background noise so that you can hear as clearly as possible. If you have any issues at hearing at any point during this exchange, could you please use the chat box to send me a message saying so. Hopefully, most of you have working microphones. Don't worry if you don't, as you still have a chance to ask any questions by typing them into the chat box, and either myself or our speakers will read them aloud. The webinar is being recorded so that you can view it again or share it with colleagues. It will be made available on the Sustainability Exchange with the presentation and any other resources a few hours after the exchange has ended. You'll be sent a short survey to gain your feedback. Please take the time to complete this, as it's very useful to us. Okay, so that's all from me. Thanks, and over to our speakers.
Thank you for coming today. I'm Jo, and I'll be starting off the presentation today. And so I will introduce by talking a little bit about the strategy at Loughborough, and I will, when I can get the slides to move, just give me a minute. There we go. Yeah, talking about the campus and the strategic side of trying to implement a project such as this. And then when I've done my bit, I will hand over to Anne-Marie. So as you can see from the first slide, Loughborough is the largest single-site campus in the UK. And we have a lot of trees here, 2 ancient woodlands, and then on top of that, we've got around 7,500 trees actually on the campus itself. 75% of the campus is green, so it's a very nice, pleasant place to live, work and play. And we also have some mature fruit trees already on the campus, which form part of the fruit route that we have now created and extend beyond it as well. So the slide that you can see is the campus at a glance, and I appreciate probably would look better, bigger, but really what it's there to do is to just give you an indicator of the size and scale, and the woodlands are on the left-hand side of the screen, blocked out in green. A lot of our habitat and biodiversity is on the boundaries of our campus, away from the areas of development. And it also indicates with the blue lines that you can see where our main cycle and pedestrian routes are. And they've been quite an important consideration to us with a project like this. So I mentioned looking at the sustainability strategy and how this sort of project can link into that. So here at Loughborough, we're committed to leading change in environmental sustainability, of course, as I'm sure all you guys are. And we have 4 key areas for priority action: creating a demonstrator campus, also known as a living laboratory. And that's really just looking at the synergies between teaching, research and operations, and also enterprise. Reducing our carbon footprint by 43% by 2020, although we are now looking at reducing that to 25%. That's another presentation for another day, I imagine. Improving space utilisation and changing behaviour. And the 2 key ones to this project are creating a demonstrator campus and changing behaviour. And just to say that biodiversity is a key performance indicator within our main strategic plan. So to embed and support that, we have the BAP, the Biodiversity Action Plan, and that was published in 2010. We did an awful lot of ecological surveying across the campus, and that's helped us look at how we're delivering against the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, so to keep us compliant. but also helps us with our community work and our liaison with the local community and the benefits that we get with that. And it gives us a great opportunity to raise and widen the profile of the university, which is important to us because we are a university town, but the university takes over the town, and Loughborough is very small and the university is very big, and we are like a small town on top of a town. So anything that we can do to improve social engagement is really important here. We link with the local BAP, and we are very committed to enhancing biodiversity now and for future generations. So how does the fruit route fit into a strategy? Well, here it combines a few of our key performance indicators. We can cover biodiversity, sustainable travel, behaviour change, and the demonstrator campus. But we also, as I said previously, managed to make a really good contribution to the other strategic objectives that the university has around corporate social responsibility. And that's becoming increasingly important to all of us, I think. So in terms of how the project actually evolved, in 2010, Radar, which is our contemporary arts programme, hosted a project which was called Building Green, and it created a market garden. It was just a short project for 6 months, but it offered a number of artistic events focused around sustainability. We're quite lucky that our contemporary arts programme tend to have a sustainable focus. And they brought in artists in residence, there were talks, workshops and demonstrations. And that kind of identified a piece of land for the work, which you can see in the picture. And that really helped us look at how we could sustain it going forward. And as that programme started to come towards a natural end, Anne-Marie Culhane was invited to then devise a project that would help us continue the work of Building Green, and she proposed the fruit routes, and that ended up finding its way to myself because it was quite a big project and it was felt that it would fit better within the sustainability side of the team. And I picked it up and thought this is going to be so much better than car parking. So the vision of fruit routes is to plant fruit and nut trees along cycle paths and footpaths, which will create a spring snowfall of blossom, which it did do, and an abundance of fresh fruit for harvesting, which it has started doing. Our mature trees give us tons and tons of apples every year, and we've had a bumper harvest this year. But the fruit route's been planted by people who live, work and pass through the campus. And we have a really good variety of pears, plums, damsons, greengages, hazels. And we're also looking at species that will relate to or manage better with the changing climate. And so that's been quite good as well, that it's going to be experimental. So of course, with any project like this, it's really important to get buy-in. That can be tricky at a university, particularly for some social related projects. But Anne-Marie brought with her fantastic experience of harvesting and distributing surplus fruit on a not-for-profit basis, particularly known for her work on the Abundance Project in Sheffield. And Anne-Marie looked at Loughborough based on what fruit we have to offer, and then she put in a great proposal about how a route could actually work here. And our first discussions at the university were actually at our strategic sustainability group, which led on at that time on cross-cutting ideas and projects, and in particular investigating anything that would fit our demonstrator campus ethos. And they were really happy to support the project. So once they'd sort of signed it off, I then just had to negotiate on funding, and that ended up coming out of our landscape master plan strategy. So operationally, introducing the route isn't always easy. It certainly didn't get immediate support and buy-in. Many people didn't really know that we had fruit on campus already. So it was important that I was in a position to promote it around the right colleagues at the institution and find the right way to get it funded. So this image is the first sketch that Anne-Marie did for the route, and there's the loose map in the middle. So then around that, you've just got the really nice, useful information that people can use when they're walking the route in terms of what to pick and what not to pick, things to look out for. And really what we were aiming at was something that was informal and could be translated as an easy read sketch map for anybody that wanted to have a look at the actual route and walk it. But in terms of the landscape master plan and getting buy-in, I had this done by our landscape architects, because they were already doing master planning for the university, and I knew that the person I needed to get the funding off would want to see the route in a formal drawing, and so that's what we did here. And the pink outline that I'm hoping you can see is the same route as on the previous slide, but it's obviously transposed onto the actual campus map. And then underneath, it's very specific about what type of things we were going to plant and where we were going to plant them, because as with all campuses, we have infrastructure, we have a lot of cabling, we have a lot of development plans, and it was really important that our deputy director could see how it was going to sit within his future development plans. And this slide just again reiterates how we were constantly looking for ways to link the different aspects of life at Loughborough. So again, reflecting how you get around the campus by bike, how that looks when you're actually wanting to walk the campus and do the fruit route, because you can do it on foot or on cycle. And so again, we were overlaying these plans just to hammer home really that it was connected into what we were already doing at the university. And any project needs a focal point, an anchor or a base. And so for this project, we have the shed, and it's basically known as the shed around campus. It's the leftover building from the Market Garden Building Green project. And it's basically been used for workshops, it's been used for musical events, poetry readings. It's used by staff at lunchtime to go and have their lunch in the summer. And it's not bookable. We leave it open whenever we can. We have had a few issues with that, which I'll come on to later. But we've just operated it as an open space really on campus that anybody can come along and use. Which fits the project in that we're trying to create a space where people can exchange ideas and run workshops and just meet and catch up. So the key to any community-based project or any project with social responsibility at its heart is to have stakeholder engagement. And we thought about that a lot at the design phase. Registered that there needed to be a large number of stakeholders involved, and we're really, really keen to make sure that it did involve our local community. Our boundary is mainly residential properties, a lot of which have overhanging fruit, and so what we've done is right from the start of this project, we've engaged those local residents, and it's been really, really successful. And a lot of them now are friends of the route, and a lot of them now support us and help with our harvesting and other events. And you definitely need to create a buzz about the project. To do that here, again, as I mentioned before, you need to know the right people in the institution and think about who your supporters would be from the start. So as well as operational groups within facilities management, I talk to students, other staff, we got our environmental champions involved, we talk to our local design school, corporate relations and publicity, and also our grounds and gardens team, who have been absolutely brilliant, and we couldn't have done it without their support. So this is the first flyer that Anne-Marie produced, and again this was off base a little bit from the usual university corporate publicity, so I've had to go to task a little bit with our corporate image and marketing teams, because they're very set in how they like them to be produced, and the Fruit Roots project is a little bit anarchic occasionally, and that's how we like it, because it makes people sit up and see and look and be interested, and that's what we want really. But this was sent out to all of our neighbours on the boundary of the project, and is heavily supported by our community liaison team. So whenever we have an event, they support the publicity locally for us. In terms of the implementation for the project, we started in summer 2011, where we did a lot of talking and meeting and designing, and then we began engagement in the autumn of that year and had our first harvest and celebration. February time is for planting, and that's when we look at putting in new fruit trees. And in May, as we move into spring, we do walks of the fruit route, which are supported by Anne-Marie and local ecologists. And then each autumn, we're now looking at annual harvesting celebrations. And then this summer, we threw in a really successful summer walk, which was really lovely because the trees were all in blossom. And we also included a night bat walk in that because we have a very, very active bat population on campus. They obviously benefit from the fruit being here and the fruit root and trees. And we do things like wild tea and scones, which attracts all sorts of different people. But it again creates a space where people can come and gather and talk and share the route. And then going forward, we've got our harvest celebration, which is actually tomorrow and Saturday. Additional planting planned for next year, and we've just secured additional space to do that. Updated mapping and hopefully recipes. And then more celebration and walks. And we're also exploring how Loughborough University can make it a legacy project in that something that won't be touched for at least 100 years. And by that I mean really that the developers and the project managers won't cut the trees down. And it's a really difficult thing to do because we're a huge university and development is a big part of what we do as well. So that's one of the biggest challenges for me going forward, is how to secure it as a legacy project. The resources that we required to do this, it was quite heavy in the first year from a staff point of view. So anybody that's thinking of doing it, you would need to allocate the time to project manage it. The external project lead from Anne-Marie has been invaluable, and years 2 and 3 then hopefully start to see more involvement from volunteers, which we're now experimenting with. But the actual financial resource has been around 23k. I mentioned challenges, finding an agreeable route that allows ongoing campus development. The rugby boys peed on a lot of the young trees at the side of one of our pitches and killed them. Allowing flexibility, so to get the most out of the project, we incorporated underplanting of our hedgerows, and we forage. So we look at foraging plants across campus as well, things like wild garlic, anything else you can use that you can eat. And there's a constant negotiation for space to expand the route. So now I'm going to hand you over to Anne-Marie.
Hi everyone. First of all, we're just going to look at a slideshow which will last about 2–2.5 minutes. It's slide and text, and I'm not really going to say anything while you look at the pictures. It's just a chance to sort of, I guess, soak in the flavour of what Fruit Route is and the kind of events we do, and sort of a sort of poetic take on the Fruit Route. So I'll let that run now. Okay, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about my involvement in the project and where the project came from, probably for about 15 minutes. So some context to the fruit roots, just in terms of orchards and the need for orchards in the UK. Common Ground, who's an artistic group that have been working with orchards for the last 30+ years, did a lot of really interesting work around orchards and their social and economic context. And one of their publications states that since the 1950s, nearly 2/3 of England's orchards areas have been destroyed. So that's not only a source of food and a way of humans to get local food sources, but also in terms of the biodiversity that brings, and also the sort of beauty of all the different varieties of fruit trees that we have, and particularly apples, which there are over 3,000 known varieties of apples. So that's one of the context points for fruit roots in my work. Also, I'm interested in the political aspect, and Jules Pretty's quote, "The most political act we do on a daily basis is to eat." As an artist and sustainability activist, I'm very conscious of every decision I make around food, and I'm really interested in working with food creatively in terms of engaging people more with seasonality, and also what that means in terms of awareness of food and when it's available at different times of the year, and the way that also draws you into cooking, preserving foods, and basically eating more sustainably. I'm also really interested in working with food because it's something that's all-inclusive. So I get to work with really interesting groups of people who might not be brought together in different situations. So a lot of the projects that I do involve people who may be, I don't know, 70, 80-year-old, and then it may be also involve 2, 3-year-olds. So it's a fantastic mix of people that get drawn to the project. And also the inherent unsustainability and lack of resilience in our current food system, where I think the food in our supermarkets, if we had problems with bringing food in to our supermarket system, within 3 or 4 days, we would be struggling to get food through that system. So let's look at other more sustainable ways of sourcing food in our environment. The context of my practice, very briefly, is that I'm a socially engaged artist. Most of my work takes place outside of the gallery context, and within, I guess, the social sculpture framework of someone like an artist like Joseph Beuys, where I'm working with people in the real world, and it's the relationships between the people and the process that go on that is important as the sort of outcomes of the work, and I guess the sort of more conventional art objects that get produced. In fact, with Fruit Roots, the whole project is a mixture of these different elements. I work on all the design aspects, I work on creating the actual events, and I also work on actual object production that relates to the route itself. So the route came out of my work working. I set up an artist and food growers group called Grow Sheffield. If you want to look that up, growsheffield.com in Sheffield, which was asking questions about urban food in Sheffield, trying to network organisations that were working on their own and to strengthen the web of food growers in Sheffield. And that was done through an artistic frame. So I did a whole series of events around harvest time, some of them more poetic and some of them very sort of action-based, guerrilla gardening, guerrilla gardening, certain inner city planters that were being elected by the council, or one of the big projects we did was the Abundance Urban Fruit Harvesting Project, where we put information all around the city to invite people to share excess fruit they had with us from their fruit trees. So that was often people with fruit trees in their gardens, or people who perhaps fruit trees that we'd find in parks or on gap sites or industrial wastelands that weren't being harvested. And you can look up that project. So there's a handbook that goes with that project that's really relevant for the Fruit Roots project, which is just a guide of how to organise a community harvesting group. And now we have about 150 volunteers in Sheffield and harvest several tons of fruit, which that's redistributed to homeless shelters and nursery groups and also community cafes. So yeah, that I could talk about that, but I'll leave that for the moment. So that's sort of where I learned about how to engage people in fruit harvesting, and also how much fruit is out there and how much is being wasted. I mean, tons and tons is just falling quite often onto concrete or not back into the earth, although some of it is. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't all get used, but there is a lot of waste fruit there that isn't used, and it's fantastic to make use of this abundant resource. So the Orchard City Manifesto was something I developed out of the Abundance Project, and the Orchard City Manifesto was just kind of issuing forth a call for a city or a town to take on the idea of framing itself as an orchard city. And my experience in Sheffield was that I was navigating the city through the fruit trees. My knowledge was based on where all these trees were, and I was starting to see the city more as a kind of dispersed orchard rather than as with the houses in between. And I just thought, okay, so if we could link up all these trees and actually see the city as an orchard and make use of a lot of our spare land with fruit trees, that would be a fantastic resource for people to have in years to come. And the fantastic thing about working with fruit trees is that the maintenance is minimal. So relating to sort of more annual-based growing systems, if you get a fruit tree off to a good start and maybe do some formative pruning, you've got a very sort of low labour input for a huge yield and huge return in terms of amenity value, in terms of spiritual value, in terms of actual physical resource, in terms of yield. So the Fruit Roots project, you can see probably where it's come from, that sort of all the thinking around that, and thinking, okay, well, if people who are walking or cycling around campus or on various cycle paths around the country could come across fruit trees that are intentionally planted for them to harvest, wouldn't that be fantastic? And so when I got invited to Radar to propose a project, it seemed the perfect thing to propose at Loughborough. And I got the chance to meet Joe, who immediately sort of latched onto the idea, and it really seems to fit here. Can you help me with moving the slide? So we've just got our slide stuck. A second. So yeah, I guess the call that I would issue is who's got the courage and the vision to redefine their town or city or campus as an edible orchard landscape. So the Fruit Roots provides a rich habitat for not only for people but for other plants and insects and animals. And what I also do with the Fruit Roots project, and what is really key for me, is how do we sort of relocate cultural activity within the framework of one outdoor space, because I think a lot of people really love being outdoors together, and actually engaging in activity together around growing and harvesting and planting is just a really nice way for people to make connections with each other. And also in terms of the creative side, so quite often when we do a new planting or when we're at harvest time, there will be a creative, celebratory or performative aspect to marking that activity. So it becomes something which is a memorable event and part of an ongoing cycle. I'm also really interested, as Joe mentioned, in the lifespan of the fruit root, because potentially these trees will be here for many years. And sort of the connections that gives to people in the place. So if you're a student and plant a tree here now, maybe you'll come back in 10, 20 years' time, and that tree will have grown. Likewise, we have staff with children who are planting trees, or people a bit older who think, okay, I'm planting this tree, it's going to be here, still growing when I'm gone. So that's a lovely way for people to actually make a proper connection to the land. The initial stages of this project, establishing relationships with people who are already working in the context. So in terms of Loughborough, we have the landscaping and gardening group, which meet at the shed and have a permaculture garden there, and they're fantastic, and we work hand in hand all the time, and very complementary projects, and we're always bringing in different people to our projects who feed in and out of both. Developing a good rapport with the ground staff was absolutely key, and as Joe said, they're fantastic and really supportive. and are ultimately responsible for the minimal maintenance that is required, keeping an eye on the trees and helping with the planting activities, and also sort of just buying into the project and its aims. You know, really exciting to get them on board. Establishing trust with the sustainability team. As an artist who's engaged with relationships, building relationships with diverse groups of people and getting people maybe to do things they haven't done before in terms of engaging in some kind of celebration or activity. That's just a matter of building trust, and I guess Jo seeing the project in action and understanding how I work, and then, you know, giving me scope to do some of the more experimental things. We have an active project blog, which fully reports all our activities and events. And we try to make the launch events as visible and exciting as possible. So I have this Eat Your Campus bike trailer, which I cycle around with whenever I'm up here. And I do things like, for the next couple of days, I'll be putting apples all around campus in different departments and in people's bike baskets, and maybe just in sneaky little places with Fruit Root tags on them, which will give you a little link to the project and maybe invite you to share the apple with someone else or give it to someone else, and just sort of create a bit of curiosity. What is Fruit Root? How do I find out about it? And yeah, so just some of the projects. Oh no, let's talk about, sorry, we'll talk about the first route, what we had on it. I went for a huge number of different varieties, looking at local heritage varieties, looking at varieties that were near the edge of their viability in terms of the climate, thinking how the climate may change, taking advice on that, and being a bit experimental with what we put in. Using buildings that we've got, so we've got a south-facing physics building, which is a really warm microclimate, and we've got currently got very successful apricots and quinces growing up that very rapidly. So yeah, making use of the brick architecture, which holds the heat and gives us a bigger scope for what we can grow. And what I've done is I've chosen varieties that either bear fruit earlier on, so I'm trying to catch the student year as much as I can. So things like cherries that have an early fruiting, so people can harvest them in June time. Obviously, there are things that will come into fruit when the students aren't here, which is fine because we have the community and the staff who can harvest them. But with my apples and a lot of my pears, I've tried to go for late varieties, which will be ripening October, November, even December, January, so that they're here when the maximum number of people are around. And I'm also choosing varieties that can be used for different purposes. So we've got cooking apples, eating apples, and cider. We've got a lovely little cider orchard which is coming on nicely. And in terms of cooking, we've been talking to the catering team at Loughborough, who are basically interested in harvesting some of the fruits as they come, you know, as they mature, and using them in their on-site catering, which is quite an interesting point. So we're about ready to do some pruning, and we'll be doing pruning for the first time with volunteers next February. Some of the activities we've done so far, you'll have got a sense of this from the presentation of images, but we've done apple pressing with the local Loughborough transition group, guided foraging walks, so alongside the new fruit trees and the existing fruit tree resource and the existing nut tree resource, I'm also engaging people with what they can forage on campus, and that obviously changes throughout the year, and we do walks in spring when it's really at its peak, and also in autumn using different berries, particularly for making preserves and chutneys. And we're also, as often as possible, inviting different people with different disciplines to lead the walks around the route. So it may be an ecologist, it may be an artist, maybe a poet, and they will have a different perspective on the route and how to interpret or read the route. yeah, we've done workshops on cider and fruit winemaking, which were fairly popular with the students and staff. And we've had feast events. We have an annual harvest festival, which we're having on Saturday this year, with a bonfire and live music. And as I said, events to mark the particular important parts of the cycle of the fruit trees. Installations, the maps are hand drawn, and yeah, I guess there's just a lot of attention to detail and thinking about, for example, all the people that came to plant the first trees all got given a hand screen printed limited edition print for taking part in that activity. And the other thing that I'm really enjoying as an artist, and also having Jo to help me facilitate, are doing events on the fruit route that take place at different times of the day, and really open up the campus as a place to have a relationship with the trees and the different people that are here. My sense of coming in from the outside is that a campus is often a place of work, a place of people moving around from one place to the other, and they're not really noticing the place having its own integrity and its own community. And it's really fantastic to be actually inhabiting the campus. For example, for the back walk, to be walking through and spending time in the campus at 11, 12 o'clock at night with 30 people was really interesting. Or doing events at dawn within the colleges where we're listening to the dawn chorus on the campus. So we've got a very diverse group of people that come to events. We're starting to get people repeatedly coming back to all of our events, which is lovely. Yeah, to summarise then really before we have public questions, the fruit route is ultimately about the sense of ownership that people who live and work here develop. So my role is really to kind of plant the first seeds and to really offer up all the different possibilities of how the route can be part of the university life. What's really important about a route for me is that the route can become etched in the culture of the campus. So people, once we have a route, we can keep marking that route. And then the idea is that that route just becomes part of the whole sort of map of the university, and people know where the fruit route is. They know what time of year to go there. We are developing more complex mapping systems with the design school. So I'm working with PhD students to develop an online mapping resource, which may well develop into an app where people can get alerts when trees are ready to harvest. And ultimately, the dream is that the whole campus becomes covered in fruit and people are picking it all the time. And that, in a sense, once that becomes part of the kind of the culture of Loughborough University, or culture of the way people are thinking here around local food, and my job's done and I can move away and do it somewhere else. And that's always the principle behind, that was the principle behind the Abundance Project as well. The idea is that once that sort of new way of thinking about local food, and the fact that you can go and get a bag of 3 apples and you know what to do with it to make chutney, or you've got the skills to know that it's not just going to be made into crumble, there are 100 different apple recipes you can make use of, then my job is done. So we'll see how long that takes, but the idea is that I sort of slowly withdraw my input and the community itself takes ownership. And really by year 3, which we're in now, we're just entering, that's starting to happen. So we're kind of getting this group of people that are coming forward and wanting to be friends with the route and wanting to kind of take ownership of the project. So thanks very much. And I'd just like to say it's a massively collaborative project, and I work with some key other artists involved, particularly a local artist called Paul Keneally. So it's not an independent thing by any means, it's a group effort, and it's great fun.
That's both of us done, folks. So I don't
Brilliant.
know if some questions or not.
Brilliant. This is Emma again from the EAUC. I think everyone agreed that was very interesting, and I hope that people have lots of questions if you just want to think about those. I did ask in the chat box earlier during the presentation, I asked them where do you see the challenges and opportunities in your own institutions for setting up a fruit route? And I have got a couple of responses back. So, the general idea seems to be things like space is an issue. A certain university has a few acres around the building and would be keen to try and do something, but quite poor soil, and they're located in the green belt, so we need to think carefully about when we can fit in and where. Is that anything that you guys, Joe and Anne-Marie, have come across?
Yeah,
poor soil?
if I take the space and then Anne-Marie takes poor soil and green belt, so from a space point of view, it is tricky, and the way I've got around it with a lot of my biodiversity work actually is to stick to the boundaries, because generally development doesn't hit the boundaries of the campus. And we've also not gone too big. So I think to date we've probably planted around 100 trees. We've planted probably 500, 600 widths, which we've planted into hedgerows, but in terms of actual fruit trees planted, and when you think of the scale of the campus, it's not that huge, but the impact can still be quite good. So space, I would look at, you need to keep alert. I mean, at Loughborough we have a space allocation committee. For example, other institutions all have different ways of allocating space, but I have to apply to them if I want space. So you need to keep alert to when space comes up and then bid for it as well, which I've done. But don't underestimate how much fruit you can cram into a small area, I would say, as well, and into areas that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about.
Yeah, can I just come in now on scale? Is that we've chosen mostly in Loughborough, we're choosing sort of rootstock, which will give us trees at about 12 to 14 feet, and they're not huge. We've only got one area of the cider trees which are on full size rootstock. And also, you can buy fruit trees on dwarfing rootstock. I think if you just, and a dwarf tree can yield, quite a lot of apples. They can be very heavy with apples. So I think work with what you've got and don't worry about scale. I think you only need a few trees to give a real sense of it being an abundant place, and you still get the beauty of all the blossoms, and you're still going to get a biodiversity benefit. I guess it's quite nice to have little clusters because that gives a sense of place. Although in Loughborough we have got areas where we've got individual trees as well between the clusters of trees. So and every campus is going to be able to work with the project in a different way. I've just started doing a scoping project with Exeter University, and I think the project will take a very different shape there, just because of because every campus is different. In terms of poor soil, I mean, what I would initially say is that in a sense that gives you a really interesting project start, because you could build into your project, okay, how do we build up the soil here? And looking at the soil, looking at, okay, what do we need here? And you could even start off the project as a kind of composting project and work out whatever you need to get to before the fruit trees grow. But the fruit trees don't necessarily need a super rich soil. They can grow in amazingly challenging environments. So, I mean, you'd obviously have to know really what you mean by poor soil. But I think you could build that into the project, maybe 1 or 2 years of building up the soil before you even start. I also
Brilliant. Did you have anything to expand on that? Sorry.
Yeah, there was something about Greenbelt which I missed actually.
Is that just if you're in an inner city university, perhaps?
This institution just happens to be located in the green belt, so need to think carefully about what we can fit and where. So
it's just that space is tight, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I think probably what we said covers
that. I mean, there is the foraging aspect. So the initial audit here was around what is already here and contextualising it, and then not going beyond the scope of what the place could deal with. So we did do the initial audit, and also that really helps you know what things are thriving, and then you can work that into your project. So I wouldn't see that as a problem. We're just lucky here that we've got a lot of space. It doesn't need to be.
No, and I think also it's worth thinking out of the box in terms of you don't necessarily have to, it doesn't have to be a planted root. You can combine with what you've already got. So, you know, we've harvested the majority of our fruit this year has come off current trees, and you, like we're doing, you can look at overhanging fruit if you have it, or fruit that borders your land, or other people's fruit. So that's where the collaboration comes in. So you can still create a fruit route, but you don't necessarily have to own trees, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting option here is also how could we create a route that links the town to the university. So we've probably got about half a mile between here and Loughborough Centre. Is there a way of that becoming part of the sort of connecting routes that we enhance existing cycle paths or routes with trees, or the odd tree to kind of give us a kind of a rough pathway through? So yeah, it doesn't have to be necessarily on campus, it's just using the fruit trees and using the harvests as a way of connecting with the community on campus and off campus.
Perfect, lovely, thank you. Another response we did have to that question was that this university has a supportive estate team and awareness within the university, and there are large grounds and historic reference being 600 years old, but their main challenge is funding. Did you experience any funding issues, or I would imagine that would be quite a key challenge with quite a few universities.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I typed into the chat box, and I think, you know, it's 23k over 3 years, but we tend to spend it in smaller chunks, so it tends to be sort of £2 here, £3 there, and there's ways of reducing that depending on how much you want to spend on publicity, printing, materials, and that sort of thing. The actual trees don't necessarily cost that much money, and one of the ways that I've worked it is that by pushing it into the landscape master planning of the university, we now try and tag in any fruit tree planting onto current development projects. So the first tranche of funding came from the landscape master planning pot as an extension of that, and so that first 10,000 comes in there. Now I bid annually for money to continue the project, but I think it's about getting an idea of what investment you would need in the first instance, and then looking at whether or not through any biodiversity plans that you have or facilities management landscape plans that you have, whether you can, or even your grounds and gardens teams, whether there's little pots that they've got that you could dip into, because ultimately you're enhancing the aesthetic of the campus, the biodiversity and habitat, and all of those things I imagine will fit other strategic objectives. So that's how I approached it here. But I do still have to fight for it. It's not a given that I will get it. And unfortunately, these are the sorts of projects that can get sidelined. But over a period of 3 years, it's not an enormous amount of money for the impact it creates and the amount of community engagement.
Yeah, can I just add to that? The project that I'm starting at Exeter at the moment, the seed funding for that has come through the arts and culture element of Exeter University, and also an external arts organisation. So that's coming through a different route, and that just might be something that people could just think of a bit about exploring. Also, I work very closely with the School of the Arts here, and we may be, you know, putting in AHRC bids with them, which will help support this project from another angle. So looking in a cross-disciplinary way has been really helpful in either getting support in kind or, you know, ensuring future funding support.
Okay, thank you. We have had a couple more questions come in here, if you don't mind answering them. One is, do you have or have you had any health and safety issues with fallen fruit on pathways? Having an apple tree in my own garden, I know how slippery fallen fruit can be.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because our head of ground is always errs on the negative when it comes to students, and he was worried that they would damage the trees, but he was also worried that they would use any fruit to throw at people. And they have done neither, actually. And I think in terms of health and safety, we've not had any issues, but we are quite vigilant about risk assessments when we do harvest, and we're lucky we have two on-site arborists here because we've got so many trees, so they're very supportive of our project. So they come out with their picking sticks and they climb the trees for us if needed. Anne-Marie climbs trees, but she does that off her own back. We don't condone her doing that, but certainly we don't encourage students or staff to do anything dangerous. But we've never had an incident with an apple falling on somebody and it, you know, being a problem. They don't generally fall onto the paths here. We're quite lucky they're falling onto areas of grass, so that isn't really an issue for us. But we are aware when we do community events that we do just have to make sure people don't lift things that are too heavy and all the basic things that you take into account when you've got community involved.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we just have one last question here from Mark. Have links been made between the sustainability and health agendas? He coordinates the UK Healthy Universities Network, and linking health and sustainable food is a key issue and high on their members' agenda.
I think a couple of ways probably. I think we all know that it's healthier to grow and eat food or buy food that's locally sourced. And I think we encourage that as part of the sale of why the fruit route's a good thing, because we are a heavily populated campus, so we've got over 5,000 students living on campus. We can also use that. So the argument that with the fruit route, they can walk out of their door and go and harvest some apples or some plums and then go back and cook something with it. And that's been particularly interesting because a lot of the people involved with the fruit route and the gardening society are international students, and they bring very different ideas and different cultures to the campus and different food habits. And so it's created relationships in ways that you wouldn't necessarily have perceived at the start of the project around healthy eating, around healthy communities, and around engaging. I mean, we're generally a very healthy campus here anyway because of the sporting link, and ongoing what we're looking at doing is linking more with our campus living teams and feeding the produce back into the catering because it's locally sourced.
So yeah, I mean, the other, in response to the question from Mark, I'm thinking there's a really, really good point though, in a sense that we haven't fully explored the health side of possible ways. I mean, that could be a really good way of it getting some funding support actually for new projects, would be to frame it within that perspective. And even in terms of gardening and trees and mental health, I think that's becoming, people are becoming more aware, more articulate about how those affect people's sense of well-being as well as actually physically ingesting delicious fresh fruit. So I think it's a really good point. It'd be really useful for us to know a bit more about the Healthy Universities Network. I don't know if that has funding or whether we could become a project that's linked to that in some way.
Yeah, and I think Anne-Marie's right. It's an area that I'm trying to explore more with sustainability generally, that kind of theory about loving your campus and what's on it, and people working more as a community. And I think this project has sort of shown me the importance and value of that, and some of the students on the project have said that by coming together and gardening with other students and then cooking food and then having open discussion about politics, ecology, life, the universe, they have felt a lot better for it. So these types of projects do offer something else, which not all campuses have, and certainly here the big focus is sport, and that generally attracts a certain kind of individual. So this project has shown its value to another group of people who perhaps were on the fringe before. So it does definitely have positive benefits in that way.
Fabulous, thank you. We do actually have one more question, and then I think we'll leave it at that. First of all, they say thanks to both speakers for an interesting session. She was just wondering about the initiation of projects like this. Do they need to come from the university, or do you think the universities would welcome ideas for projects that come from local communities, and universities could help local groups access funding? Any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, Loughborough actually does have a pot of money every year that our local community groups can bid for, specifically for community-based projects. So, for example, we've recently put an apiary on campus, but it was supported by the Leicestershire and Rutland Beekeeping Association, and this year that association applied to our fund as an external group to get funding for the apiary because it's collaborative. So, yeah, I think absolutely there's scope for it to go both ways. I think in this case, it was kind of both really. The fruit route came through a project we were involved with, but Anne-Marie was external and had worked on other community projects. I think we have an obligation to work with our community, really. We have such a huge impact on them that we should do that, but they don't always feel welcome in the student environment.
Okay, interesting. No, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think we've better leave the questions at that. I'd just like to let everyone make sure they're aware that this was actually a popular session at the 17th annual EAUC conference, and therefore we followed up and it's been made into a successful webinar. It's also, this project is a finalist for the Green Gown Awards this year, so good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, no, thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone agrees that was very interesting.